Hey everyone, welcome to Android Studio Masterclass. And in this class, we are going to learn how to use Retrofit to consume API data. We are going to post our data to an API that will allow us to communicate with our server. As you can see, we are going to register a user and then sign up that user. This is a demo application that I'm going to illustrate what we expect to learn within the course. So at the end of this course, we'll have created this user register page that will allow us to register a user. We can try registering a user. We can have learn 1234. Email, we have learn 1234 at gmail.com. Can have password as password 123, pass at 123, and then register. So once the registration is successful, you'll see that toast message, and when you look here, you can see the communication between the Android and the server through the API. So what I did, I posted data to this endpoint. I gave it this data, that is date joined, the email, as you can see. We did this one, date joined, the email, that is learn 1234. We gave it password and the username. And then we got a successful response, and we got the ID, the URL, the username, and the other details. So now what we want to do is to log in that user. So let's clear the console and see what happens when we log in the user. So I can have learn 1234 and then pass it 123, and then so unable to log in. Okay, let's see, pass it 123. That was a successful login. As you can see, we posted data to this endpoint. We gave it password and username, and then we got a successful response which had the username, email, and user ID. So that's what we are going to learn, how to communicate with our server using Retrofit through an API. So I'm just going to give you a course overview. So as you can see here, we'll start with library configuration, and that is Retrofit. We are going to do our screen design, and finally, we are going to do the actual authentication. Within the library configuration, I will show you how you can be able to download Retrofit, the JSON converter. We are going to talk about HTTP logger interceptor, which is this one, which enables us to see the communication. And then we are going to sync our project, create our model, and then create API service and API client. API client allows us to access Retrofit and the methods that are defined within our API service. API service contains all the endpoints that we want to consume. And then we are going to do screen design. We are going to customize our theme, download icons, design the screens, that is splash, login, register, and dashboard. We are going to use view binding to find IDs. We are going to do activity navigations, permissions, and clear text. And finally, we are going to do actual registration. Let's begin by creating a new project, which we are going to add the libraries to it. So create a new Android Studio project. New project, select empty activity, give your project a name. We can say Retrofit users, and then click finish. Give your project a few seconds so that it can finish loading the Gradle dependencies. Once that is done, we proceed to add our libraries. We are going to add our libraries within the Gradle script folder. There is a file named as build Gradle. It's here, and we are going to add it inside the dependencies block. So let's begin adding our libraries. We are going to add 3 main libraries, that is Retrofit, JSON converter, and HTTP logger interceptor. So let's begin by adding Retrofit. Go to your browser and type square.github.io/retrofit. You'll get some information about the Retrofit library, that is introduction, API declaration, which contain request methods, URL manipulation, request body, form URL, and form encoded at multiparts, header manipulation, and for us what we need is Retrofit configuration. So go to the Gradle part, copy this one and paste it in your project. Remove insert latest version and go back, scroll to the top, and then create a variable on GitHub so that we can get the latest version. So at the time of making the video, 290 is the latest version. So I'm going to insert 290. Then I'm going to go for JSON, scroll up, and then copy the JSON, add it within the dependencies, implement JSON, and then the latest version for this one. Right click it and open the GitHub part, and you'll get 289. So we have even 290. And finally, we need our final library, that is HTTP logger interceptor. So HTTP logger interceptor, then include this one in your Gradle, and then sync your project. So that's all you need to know when you want to add the libraries. The next thing that we are going to do is to create the models, API services, and API client. We use model to hold data that we want either to send to the server or the data that we are getting from the server. As you saw earlier, within our login screen, we pass the username and the password, and then we get user details upon successful authentication. When we are trying to register a user, we pass username, email, and password, and then we get response that contain ID and other user data. So to create our model, I'm going to begin by creating a new package, and I'm going to call it model. Within the model, I'm going to create 2 packages. The first one, I'm going to call it request, and then I'm going to create a new one. So I'm going to call it response. Within the request, I'm doing authentication request. So I have auth request, and then I'm also doing registration request. Register request. Remember the reason I'm doing auth, or we can just call it let's refactor this one and rename it to login request. And then I'll have a response. I'll have login response, and I will have register response. So within my login request, remember the data that you're posting to the server when the user wants to log in is val username of type string and val password, which is of type string. The data that we get from the server is, so let's look at how our API looks like. This is the API. We have authentication. This is where we log in user and pass the details for login. As you can see, it's /authentication. Then we have images. We are not going to learn this one, but we are going to consume users. So for users, we can see what we are required to post. It's here: username, first name, last name, email is active, date joined, password. But for this case, we're only going to pass username, email, and password. Then we are going to get our response. So the response that we expect once the user is logged in will be val user ID, which will be an int, val username, which is of type string, and val email, which is of type string. Remember, if you don't know exactly the type of data that you are going to expect back, with the help of this library, you can log your response, and then you can get the data that the server is returning. We are going to learn this in our series of this class. So for now, what we expect once the user is logged in is the ID, username, and email. Then we have a registration request. So I'm going to convert this one to a data class. And for us to register a user, we require to pass val username. Remember, this is of type string. We also require to pass val email, which is of type string. And we also need to pass val password, which should be type string. Most of the time, the person developing this API will tell you the data that is expected to be passed and the response. But you can also check when you are posting a user the type of data you expect to pass. In our case, we are going to ignore the first name, the last name is active, and pass the 4 of these one. So let me add date joined. Val date joined of type string. And then we are going to expect a response. And the response that we are going to expect, so I'm going to have data here, convert it to a data class. It will be val ID of type int, val username, which will be a string, and then we're going to have val email of type string. So we are going also to get other data, but our main concern, we want to get the ID, the username, and the email. So that's all we need in our model. So we need the requests and the response. We have declared the login request and the login response, register request, and the register response. Now let's create our API service. An API service defines all the endpoints that you want to consume data from. In our case, we only need 2 endpoints, that is users. As you can see, we need to post users, and we also need to authenticate, which is a post request. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to create a package here, and I'm going to say service, and then within it I'm going to create a class, and I'm going to say API service. This one is an interface, should be an interface, and within it I'm going to have at post, and then I'm posting to authentication, and what I'm posting is fun login user, and that endpoint requires data, and the data that is required, we are going to pass it in our request, that is login request. And what you are going to get is a callback. So we have a call for Retrofit, and it will contain our login response. So I'm also going to do at post, and then I'm going to have users. As you can see here, we have done for this one authentication, and we also need users. And what I'm going to have is fun register user, and then I'm going to pass data. The body will be register user request, and I'm going to get a callback of register response. So that's all we need in our API service. If you have more endpoints, like in this case, you might need to retrieve all users, you are going to use get. I can give you that as a practical example. Just try it. Add a get request for getting users. You can patch a user, you can put a user. So, but in this class, we are going to do login and register. Now let's create an API client. An API client will allow us to define our retrofit, and will also allow us to be able to access these endpoints by calling these functions. So what I'm going to do is create another endpoint. I create another package, and I'm going to call it client, and within it I'm going to have API client. So within the API client, I'm just going to convert it to an object so that I can be able to access the method inside. And the first method will be fun get retrofit, which is going to return retrofit. So here I'm going to have val retrofit, which will be retrofit dot builder dot add converter factory. Remember, we added our JSON converter factory dot create dot add dot base URL. Remember, we need to tell it what is our base URL, and as you can see here, our base URL is this one. It's either the full domain or the subdomain. So we are going to put that one, and then we are going to build, and here I'm going to return retrofit. And then we also need to have fun get API service, and this one is going to return our API service. What we need to do is to return get retrofit dot create API service dot class. And then we have our retrofit and we have our API service. The final thing that I'm going to show you is how you can be able to log the data. So remember we added this library called HTTP logger interceptor, this one, which is meant to log the request and response that the server and the device are communicating. So what you need to do is val logger, which will be HTTP logger interceptor dot, and then you'll have logger dot set level, whether you want to log the whole object, the basic that includes only the headers. So for this case, we are going to log the whole body, and then logger dot once you set the logger, that is either you want the basic or you want the whole body, then we are going to append it to a HTTP client. So what we need to do is have val client, which will be OK HTTP client dot add interceptor, okay. So we need to add this interceptor dot builder dot add interceptor, and remember our interceptor is this one, HTTP logging interceptor. So what we need to do is logger dot build, and then back to this retrofit we are going to do client. We need to add client, and the client is OK HTTP client, and then we are going to add this one. So the purpose for this is to allow us to log the request and response. This one gives us retrofit instance, and this one is the one that we are going to use so that we can access our endpoints. So now that is done, setting up the API clients. What now we are going to do next is designing our screens. Our splash screen will contain only a welcome text, as we saw in our demo application. Remember, the main aim of this tutorial is to create an app that resembles this one, which has splash screen, login screen, sign up screen, and that allows a user to log in and register. So let's go to the main activity, which is going to act as our splash screen. And instead of having hello world, we are going to have welcome to LearnTech. And then we can give this one an ID, and then we'll have TV welcome. I'll change the color, and the color will be color default, all color text, and then for the size we are going to increase it to 16. Then we are going to go to our login, and for the login what we need to do, I'll have my linear layout here. I'm going to have the width as 0, the height I'm going to lab content, and then I'm going to align it start of parent, end of parent, top of parent, and then bottom of parent. And then inside I'm going to have we're going to give it orientation and it will be vertical. Then I'm going to have a text view, lab content. I'm going to give text, user, login. Then I'm going to give it color, and I'm going to give it color text. I'm going to give it size. I'm going to give it 18, and I'm going to give style to be bold. Let me align it to the center, and then below it I'm going to have input text. So I'm going to have text, input layout, match parent, lab content, and this one I'm going to give it an ID which will be TL username. Remember, for the login screen we need username and password. So I'm going to give it start margin, and this will be 30. I'm going to give it add margin, which will also be 30. And then for top margin, I'm going to give it 50. Inside it, I'm going to have text, input, edit text, which I'm going to match parent, lab content. And for this one, I'm going to give it ID. The ID will be ET username, and I'm going to give it a hint, and the hint will be user name. I'm going to give it color text, which will be color input text. I'm going to give it a padding of 16. And remember, in our demo application we have an icon that comes before. So what I'm going to do is to copy my icons and paste them in the drawable folder. Then go back and have drawable start, and the icon for this one will be IC user. I'm also going to give it padding, so it will have drawable padding, which will be 16. Then we do the same for the password. Text input layout, match parent, lab content. We have ID for this one, which is TL password. Give it a top margin of 30. Then inside we have text, input edit text, match parent, lab content. And for this one, I'll have an ID, which will be ed password. So I'm also going to give it a text color, which will be color input. Then I'm going to give it a drawable start, and I'm going to give it a password. Then I'm going to give it a padding of 16, and even the drawable padding will be 16. We're going to give it a hint, and this one will be password. Now remember this input for password. We have this that enables the user to view or hide the password. So we are going to add that one. So I'm going to have toggle password enabled. It will be true. And then we are toggle password description. This will be password. And then we have toggle password tint, and I'm going to have color accent. Then I'm going to give these ones background, and this one I'm also going to give it a background color. And that's all we need for our edit text. Below, we are going to have a button, match parent. For height, I'm going to give it custom 60, and then I'm going to give it top margin 50, and the text will be login, and I'm also going to give it an ID of button login. Below this button, we'll have an text with an instructions. So I'm going to have, so this will be a linear layout, which I'm going to match parent and lab content. I'm going to give this one orientation, which will be horizontal, and then I'm going to give it top margin of 50, and then here I'm going to give it a text view, lab content, and the text that I'm going to give here is don't have an account, and then I'm going to have another text here, create account. This one I'm going to give it a color, that is text color, and style I'm also going to give it text style to be bold. I'm also going to give this one padding of 5, and this one I'm also going to give it a padding of 5. I'm going to align this one to gravity center, and then instead of match parent, I'm going to lab content. So I'll also give this one an ID, and the ID will be TV create account. That's all we need in our login screen. Now that we are done with the login screen, we are going to design our register screen. So we are going to copy most of the things here because we need the username, we need the password, and then we are going to add email and confirm password. But before we do that, as you can see here, we are closing the long part. So I'm just going to remove this one. Or let's just undo that and see where it belongs. So for username, we didn't close it, so we have our username below here. I'm going to close that one, and then for password, we didn't give start and end margin, so I'm going to give it here. Then for button, the same. And then for our linear layout, the same. And then I can remove this one. So I'm going to copy the whole of this one, and I'm going to paste it in my register activity, and then change, instead of user register, remember our end goal is to have an app that looks like this. So we are going to add email and confirm email and change the wordings. So I'm going to have user register. For username, we need that, and then we need another one for email. You can copy this one, paste it here, and then have user email. This is user email. And then for the app icon, we are going to have our baseline email, and then padding top, we only need 30. Then for password, we need another one, that is confirm password. So we can copy this one, and then we can paste it here. And then instead of having password, we'll have confirm password. So I'm just going to add C, and then this one will be confirm password. Our button will not be login, it will be register. And then do not have account, this one will be have an account, and then an account, and this one will be login, and this will be TV login. This will be button register. So that was all we need for our register screen. And finally, for our dashboard, we need a single text view to display the name of the logged in user. So I'm going to align it to start of parent. I'm going to give it end of parent. Top, I'm going to give it top of parent. And for bottom, I'm going to give it bottom of parent. And then ID, I'm going to give it TV user detail. Then size, I'm going to give it 18, and color, I'm going to give it text color. That's all we need for designing our screen: the dashboard, the login, the register activity main, and the register. Now we are going to add view binding, be able to access the IDs and navigate through the activities. Now, to do the actual login and register, I'll begin with registration. And for the registration, I'll have another method here, which I'll call even another click, which will be binding dot button register dot set on click listener. And when you click register, you are going to get all the input private fun get inputs. And then what we need from the inputs is val username, which I'm going to get from binding dot it username dot get text dot to string. Then we are going to have val user email, which will be binding dot it email dot text dot to string. And then we are going to have val password, which will be binding dot ed password dot text dot string. And then we are going to have val confirm password, which will be binding dot get text dot see password dot text dot to string. Now we are going to check for empty inputs. If username not equal to null, and also user email not equal to null, and user and password not equal to null, and finally if confirm password not equal to null, else if any of these one is equal to null dot, or we can just check using Kotlin dot is not empty dot is not empty dot is not empty dot is not empty. So if all of them has values, we continue with our checks. So I'm going to have another function here, private fun show error, and my show error message, I'll show message I'm going to pass message of type string, and inside it I'm going to have a toast dot make text, and I'm making in this, and I'm showing the message, and I'm having a toast dot length short, and then show. So if any of the input is empty, just say all inputs required. Then we do check for password. If password dot equal to C password, else if not equal, we show a message saying password mismatch. So if they are equal, then we proceed to do registration. Create a new method which you are going to say private fun register user, and then we are going to have val. Remember, we created a model that will hold our user data, so we are going to have val register request of type register request, which will be register request, and we need to pass data here. So the expected data is username, email, password, and date. So what you are going to do is have this method return all that data. So you are going to have username of type string, user, email of type string, user, joint date, okay, password, before this one it password of type string, and finally joined date of type string. So for this one we need the username, so we give it username, we need user email, we need password, and we did a joined date. Then we are going to have our API call. Our callback will be val API call. We are going to have remember we created this one, API client dot get service dot register user, and then we need to pass it register request, and then we are going to queue this request and then expect a callback. So we are going to have a callback which will have our register response. This one is a callback for Retrofit. So let's see here. Then we add braces here, and then within our brackets we override these two methods. Remember, this callback should be a Retrofit callback. So this one will tell us whether the user was registered successfully, and this one we are going to get why the user did get a successful registration. Once the user is registered successfully, so we are going to do if. Remember, the response can be successful or not. So if successful, we are going to move user to login so that the user can log in. Else we are going to show message, and then we are going to enable to register, or the type of message that you want to show. If the request failed, that means we had maybe network error, the server responded with the data we didn't expect, this is where we show the user that message. So what we do, we show message, and then we say an allow card, and then we can do plus the throwable dot localized message. So that's all we need there. Then we can call this method here. Once we check our password matches, then let's register user. For username, we're going to give it username. For user email, we're going to give it user email. And then for password, we're going to give it password. And then for date, I'm going to give it this date, 2021, and then December. Then I can give 03 and the time. So let's try our registration. Remember also, when we are doing this, we added the logger. So it's time for us to check what the logger does. So create account, and this one, before we start doing the actual registration, I would like we revisit the API service. Our API service provides a path whereby our URL or our endpoint points us. So if I go back and look at the API, each endpoint has a slash in the beginning and a slash at the end. Remember, we didn't put at the end, so we need to put that one. And here we also need to add one. Then we're going to click learn again. And then create account. And for this one, I'm just going to have user 10. And then for this one, I'm just going to have user 10 at gmail.com. Then I'm going to have pass at 123, pass at 123. And then let's open the logger so that we can see what happens when I click register button. So once I click register button, it's showing successful. And then here we see the data that has been posted to the server, and then the response from the server. All this is done by the logger that we added here in the API client. If you don't want to do this in production, you can just comment this one out. Then the next thing that we are going to do is user registration. Remember, the user we have created is user 10 and the password is pass at 123. So let's now try to log in our user. Now let's begin doing user login. So go to your login activity. As you can see, we have already created a method called init data, and then click listener. So we are going to add another method here, and we are going to say binding dot button login dot set on click listener. Once you click that button, we are going to have private fun. Then we are going to have get inputs. So I'm just going to copy this one and paste it here. Then the first thing that I'm going to do is to have val username, which will be binding dot it username dot text dot to string, and then I'm going to have val password, and then I'm going to have binding dot it password dot text dot to string. And then I'm going to check if they are empty or not. So if username dot is not empty and password dot is not empty, then we proceed and log in user, else we are going to show a toast message. So we can just copy our toast message it's here. Just copy it and then back to the login activity, paste it there. So what we need to do is tell the user all inputs required. If the user username and the password is there, we need to have a method here called private fun login user. And what we need is to give this method the username, which will be of type string, username of type string, and then we'll have the password of type string. Inside it, we are going to have our model. As you can see, user request, username and password. So we are going to have val login request, login request, which will be login request, and then I'm going to pass the username and the password. I'm also going to call our API client. Now for the API call, just have val API call, which is API call. So we have our API client dot get service dot, now we are doing register user, login user, and then we need to pass it the login request. Then the final thing is that API call dot enqueue, and then we'll have object, and then we need callback. Remember, this callback must be retrofit callback. So sometimes you'll have to scroll because they have different callback. Once you get this on, and then inside it we are expecting login response. Then you are going to override some methods here, the two of these. So we have on success and then on failure. When we are successful, we are going to have private fun move to dashboard. Here we are going to start activity, and then we are going to have intent. We are going to move from this to dashboard, and then if there is a failure, we are going to show a toast message. So here what we are going to do is if response dot is successful, move to dashboard, else we are going to show a message, and the message is unable to login. You can add, please check your credentials and try again. Then if it's a failure, you can show a message here and say an error occurred, and then you can even include the error t.getLocalized message. Now we are going to pass the username and the password here, so we just have your username and password. Then we can learn our application and see how it works. So we have user 10, and then for password is pass 8123. So I'm going to open here so that we can see what's happening. So we get an error message. Let's see. We have attempted to log in. There was an error. So we're going to check. So we are trying to access API, LANTech, and then there is 44, meaning there is no authentication. So we are going to go back to the API, and then it's authenticate, not authentication. Authenticate back to your API service and have authenticate. Learn again. Now you see the importance of having the logger. So we are going to have user 10, and here we are going to have pass at 1 2 3, and then let's login. There we are, successful login. Here is the dashboard. So now what you're going to do in the dashboard is to display this username of the logged in user. Now to display the name of the logged in user, just go to your dashboard, and then what you are going to start is private latinate val binding, and then we are going to have dashboard activity binding or activity dashboard binding, and then after on create have your binding, which will be activity dashboard dot inflate layout inflator, and then have val loot, which will be binding dot loot, and then we can have this one is the set content view. Then we have private fun init data, and then inside here what we want to do is have our binding dot tv user detail dot set text, and then we are going to set a text here. So the text that we want to set, we can create another method here called private fun set username, and here I'm just going to copy this one, and here I'll have username of type string, and this is what I'm going to set here. Then here private init data, I'm going to call this method inside on create, and then since I'm going to use intent to pass the username, what I need to do is to have val intent, which is equal to get intent dot get extras if intent dot all not equal to null. Then we can have username val username, which will be intent dot get string extra, and then the key will be username, and then we can call our method called set username, and we can give it the parameter username, which is of type string. Then we go back to register activity, where we are moving to dashboard, and then we can put extra username, which will be this one. We can give it username of type string, and then it will have username. Then here, remember our response have login response, so we have the username. I'll just need to have the login response, which is the response dot body dot username. We can add this one to make sure it's not null, and then we can learn our activity again. We are going to use the same user to log in, so we'll have user 10, and then we'll have pass it 1 2 3, then login. Then we have the user 10. You guys, you can try to show the email or the ID of the user. And this brings us to the end of our masterclass. Hope you guys enjoyed it. If you have a question, let me know in the comment, or you can reach us through our email at islearntech20@gmail.com. Thank you all.